Hello, everyone. My name is Derek DeWinter, and welcome to our listeners who are tuning into the DeWinter Difference, an audio podcast where I spend a bit of time with incredible people I've known for years, and you get to listen in. I hope that our conversations are insightful, fun, challenge us all, make you think a little, and are just long enough to listen to while running an errand. Our goal is to have a good time and provide something that you can apply in your own career, life, and relationships. Today, we're speaking with Brad Johnson and David Smith. Brad is a professor of psychology in the Department of Leadership, Ethics, and Law at the U.S. Naval Academy, and a faculty associate in the Graduate School of Education at Johns Hopkins University. David is an associate professor in the Carey Business School at Johns Hopkins University. Together, they co-authored two books, Athena Rising, How and Why Men Should Mentor Women, and Good Guys, How Men Can Be Better Allies for Women in the Workplace. Now, this is a bit of a departure from our typical conversations with a CFO, CEO, or CHRO, and that we've had in our podcast in the past, which on its own is a great reason to do anything. But for all of those out there leading organizations, developing teams, teaching and promoting high achievers, then Brad and David are well worth the listen. Me, maybe not so much. Gentlemen, it's a pleasure to have you join me.
Thanks for having us. Great to be here.
So, where to begin? Well, all good stories need a start. So let's begin at your beginning. In no particular order, share a little bit about how you two met, what you're spending the bulk of your time on today, and how this concept of male allyship that you discuss in your books and in other conversations that you have probably also in school started taking shape along that journey.
Yeah, glad to do that. I'll start here. This is David. And, Brad and I met when we were both teaching at the Naval Academy. We were both professors there at the same time. We overlapped for about 7 years. And I think Brad and I very quickly recognized that we had a connection in terms of our work, our research, and our teaching. And as we began to explore that, I think we found a kind of a common area of interest that we wanted to explore. And it really goes back to a lot of our own individual research that we do. And so Brad is a clinical psychologist. He's done all of his research in the area of mentoring and career developmental relationships and resources. I'm a sociologist, and I've done all my research in the area of gender, work, and family issues. And one of the things that we noticed in our own organization at the time, and as well as across many other organizations, is that often the solution to what we look at as gender inequities, so for example, a lack of representation of women in senior leadership positions in your organization, or just a lack of gender parity broadly in your organization, the solution is often to focus programming and resources toward things like women in leadership programs or women's mentoring programs, which are great, and that those are much needed. The challenge with that is that often tells or sends a signal to men that you don't have a place there. That's not for you. You don't have a role or a function. And so they don't engage, and they don't see their place there. The challenge with that is we need, of course, all of us involved in creating equity in the workplace to level the playing field there. We need men involved just as much as we do women in collaboration to doing this work. And so we love to look at this as more of a leadership issue, that we all, men and women as leaders, we all have a role and a function when it comes to creating that. And we certainly saw a lot of the disparities in our own research, which kind of got us more curious about how do we engage more men in doing this work, and how do we level the playing field? And that's what began this collaboration. I will also tell you that for both of us, that we both kind of have personal connections to this work in terms of people, women in our lives who have shared some of their experiences. For me, it was my wife, who had a parallel career in the military. For Brad, it was his sister, again, followed in his footsteps in terms of both the Navy and in psychology. And they shared a lot of the challenges, the barriers, the microaggressions, the things that they faced that really get in touch with that sense of fairness and justice that I think we all have. And so I think that was a great motivating factor for us as well. And so we use that to really explore that in our work. And that's, of course, led to our first two books, Athena Rising, and then later on, Good Guys, which focuses on allyship. As far as what we're focused on today, we're in the process of really thinking about how do we take this to the next level in terms of changing systems. We've been focused so much on individually around people, which is important because we need to do that as leaders. We need to think about how do we help managers and the everyday person on the floor be a great be a great ally in the workplace and be part of the solution. But at the same time, we know there are everyday practices. There are parts of our culture, there are policies and processes in our organizations that reinforce bias, that are creating some of these things that are, holding us back from getting to true gender equity in the workplace. And so our focus right now, the work that we're doing and really moving toward our third book is on how do we create that in the workplace? What are leaders and organizations doing today that is having great success there? And how can we extrapolate that to other organizations, maybe of different sizes, different sectors, different industries out there, so that we can all kind of share and learn from each other in doing this? We're trying to bring together all of these great best practices, which fortunately there are a lot of them, but that's also the challenge of how do you boil that down and get that into a book. And so we're really excited to launch this new venture.
Appreciate that perspective, David. It's a good foundation for us to kind of, the listeners especially, to kind of conceptualize this conversation where we kind of want to take it. Brad, several years ago, I attended an event as part of a women's organization that I was on the board of, and you were presenting on this topic of allyship, which honestly, I hadn't really heard it spoken to so specifically before. And one of the exercises that we went through at the time was for a man, which I was one of several that were there out of a group of about 100 or 150 people, to approach a woman about being a mentor or ally for them. And so I was on a round table with another man, and between the two of us, we did a terrible job in our mock session. And it was a very intimidating thing to do, and without a lot of planning for what I was going to say, because the exercise wasn't pre-planned or I didn't really know about it, I came off as almost predatory. And I wish I had a different word for it, but that's the one that I keep coming back to. And again, I hate to use the word predatory, but I was pitching the idea of being an ally to someone who, even in this exercise, immediately seemed to give off some concern about the authenticity of the overture. And there's certainly right and wrong ways to do it, and I probably did it the wrong way in that exercise. So I'd love for you to talk about some of the things that you've heard in your experience for us to combat this notion.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Derek, thanks for your courage and giving that a shot. I know that that's not easy in these workshops to kind of bust out your ally chops and give some of these ally skills a try. So, I think this was probably an exercise around, hey, if I see a high talent woman in my organization, and there are probably lots of them, how do I go about initiating a developmental relationship conversation? And Derek, I'm going to give you a different word other than predatory. I think it can sometimes come off as a little creepy. Maybe that's a little softer than predatory, but I think it's natural, but men may show up and say something like this: I'd like to mentor you, right? And I just use my creepy voice, which you never should, but I think we can get it wrong when we do this offer without any context, right? She, of course, has no idea, what are you talking about? Where did this come from? It's quite different to sort of come alongside and build in some affirmation, make it authentic, and say, hey, I saw you do that talk last week in the meeting. I thought it was really great. And I was thinking to myself, we're really lucky that we got to hire you. And I was also thinking, I hope we can keep you on board. And so, if you ever just want to talk about next steps in the organization, what that might look like, if there's any way I can support or amplify that, I've got an open door. Feel free to drop by, right? That's a little different, right? It doesn't have the creepy vibe. It's an offer, but there's context to it. And I'm able to convey to her some of what I already admire about her performance and the way she shows up. And now it's over to her, right, to decide if she wants to take me up on that. I think that feels different. I don't think it feels uncomfortable. And now it's up to her, but I think most people would probably take me up if I was a senior person in the company. I think they'd drop by. So that's maybe just an example of how that might look. One other example, Dave and I, often encourage men to build what we call their GQ, their gender intelligence. And I think when it comes to allyship, it's really important not to put all the work on women to educate you about what they experience in the workplace. So, how about self-educating? Listen to some great podcasts like this one, learn about some of the headwinds women encounter, and then go to some of those trusted colleagues that you have who happen to be women and just say, hey, I was in this session, I learned about this, and I'm really curious if this is going on here or if there are things I am missing. And would it be okay if I asked you about some of your experiences here? So, Dave and I call this the ask to ask. I think that kind of overture really conveys your curiosity, your interest, your humility. And I think a lot of people are willing to share with you about what they may be encountering in the workplace that you, as a majority male, are not. So that's just another kind of contextualized way to begin a conversation.
You are both incredible presenters. The topic is awesome, and I can't help but wonder, there must have been a few times, maybe in the early stages of talking about this, where the conversation landed poorly or awkwardly, in a room, or you got a very unexpected response from a group of people around male allyship. Am I wrong in thinking this, or is that something you can talk about a little bit more?
No, you're not wrong at all. And it's probably no surprise, but it often comes in more majority male audiences. And there can be, it really comes in the form of often some pushback or at least some very, very in-depth questioning about the validity or what we're really talking about here. And I think that, when we first started doing this work, just to be very, very honest and open about this, I think, early on, that was one of those kind of fears, right? Of you don't want to be in that audience where you're going to get all the pushback. I think what we learned along the way is that we really do want people to push back and in areas that they don't understand or they're not comfortable with or they have other ideas, because this gives us an opportunity to engage in the conversation around why we think this is important or to understand different ways and perspectives of thinking about this. And I think that's very helpful. And so something that may have started out to be very uncomfortable in dealing with, I think we quickly recognized that this was actually very helpful. And we do want people to ask the hard questions or maybe what may seem like a very uncomfortable question or pushing back on some of the concepts that we have. And about why this is true, or, for example, zero-sum beliefs are one of those things that we often encounter with, again, a lot of majority identities, certainly with a lot of white men, and that, somehow by advancing another group like women, that somehow men are going to lose in that, and not understanding maybe the perspective of understanding that, well, businesses and organizations and people all tend to advance and to gain more when we expand the pie in doing it this way. And so, one, there's a lot more in it for your organization and your business, no matter what that is. But two, there's more to be learned and to be gained individually for you as a person and as a leader when we diversify and we increase the gender equity within the workplace and make it a place where, again, everybody can thrive. The other thing is that policies and practices that we end up changing, for example, more men today, especially as we think about younger generations of men entering the workplace, have expectations about being more involved parents and partners at home. And so they're looking for a workplace that's supportive of that. And so again, as we begin to normalize things like caregiving and who we are as caregivers in the workplace, that again tends to be associated more with women, well, if that becomes more normalized, then it's acceptable for men to be doing that as well. And so again, we can be gaining in lots of other ways that people are looking for and maybe not so eager to talk about in different ways.
And let me add one more, Derek, and that is the other part of the audience that's often there when Dave and I are speaking, and that's women. I think that we have encountered pushback at times from women. And I think initially we were a little surprised by that. Like, hey, we're trying to be part of the solution here on gender equity. What's the deal? And I think we had to learn some humility around how women can experience this if men sort of butt in to, maybe it's a women's ERG or a women's conference. These are safe spaces historically for women to get together, share what they're going through, collaborate with each other. These have felt like, I think almost sacred spots for women to have one place free of, sexism and microaggression. So when men show up, understandably, some women can, feel put off by that. And I think we all have to show up with some real humility. I hope that we can get invited in because, the World Bank estimates we've got roughly 200 years to close the gender pay gap and other inequities in the workplace at our current rate of progress. We're not going to get there quickly unless men start leaning in. But how we collaborate with women matters. It cannot come off as intrusive. It can't come off as rescuing and white knighting. So men who show up in this space need to be collaborative, need to listen, and need to ask women, hey, what do you need from me? Or how can I be helpful?
You've got a third book coming out, which you talked about a little bit more of a systemic look at the topic. How much work are you guys doing with corporations specifically on this topic, or is it just books and speaking engagements? Help me understand that a little bit.
Yeah, great question. I can mention a few things, Dave, and I'm sure you'll think of others. We do the keynotes and the speaking for sure, but I think more and more, Derek, we're doing. I think organizations are interested in not just the keynote, which can be inspirational, and give kind of a level set for everybody in their organization about why allyship, what's the business and moral case, why are we talking about this, what's in it for everybody, and here are some tactics. More organizations are interested in, hey, how do we upskill? So Dave and I find ourselves doing more workshops, and those are both workshops with men. These can be men in senior leadership roles. They can be men writ large. But these are men who are leaning into partnering with women in the organization to really be better allies for inclusion and equity. And I think a lot of men believe in this. That's what we find. They just often don't know what to do. So that's really the solution that we're after. How do we upskill people, bring them in, let them have collaborative conversations, kind of like you, Derek, at that workshop you attended. Let's practice, some of the micro skills. So we do that with men. We also do it with mixed gender audience. And I think, I don't want to speak for Dave, but I think for both of us, that's really kind of our favorite when we can talk about gender collaboration broadly and then let both men and women and non-binary colleagues engage in these conversations and practice moments. It's the learning is so rich when you're doing that at a table with colleagues who don't look like you. So the skill building workshops, and then interestingly, we've been pulled into doing a lot of sponsoring work. I think a lot of organizations are saying, hey, the mentoring thing's important, and Dave and I do a lot of that as well. But we really want to get to advocacy. We're not going to close this gap until men especially start getting comfortable with loudly sponsoring, loudly advocating for women, becoming their raving fan. And so we want to put resources into that. So we've been involved in setting up and launching a number of sponsoring programs across gender. But Dave, anything else come to mind?
Yeah, I think that covers most of it. A lot of it tends to be focused on more kind of cultural shift in the organization as well, and making it a place where it's not only safe to talk about some of these topics, but encouraged to share and to talk about what's the challenges that people are facing. I think where we're really looking to move in the coming years is really getting back into the organizations to think about their specific practices, right? What are the structural things that need to change, right, before we can have lasting change, and we can create change for many people, lots of people, as opposed to just these one-on-one encounters that we're focused on right now.
You both spent a fair amount of time at the Naval Academy, and this is not a question that I gave you advance warning on. I'm curious if being in that institution, that environment, advanced some of these thoughts in a way that you may not have been able to advance them in a strictly corporate setting. I'm not even sure that was an actual question. That's more of a statement. But like, is there a there in that idea, or not? Is the Naval Institute a place where you can kind of think about things a little bit differently and maybe apply them in, I shouldn't say the real world, but a different world, outside of that?
That is an interesting question. I think the military context, in that it's a again, long-standing, very traditional, hypermasculine institution and profession presents a lot of similarities, as it turns out, to other professions. So as you think about medicine and law, for example, there's a lot of commonality, and even academia broadly. And again, the Naval Academy is kind of that blend between the academic world and the military. So we get two professions, and getting the best or the worst of in both of those as you think about it. So I think that it did provide the context for us in our own experiences, having been around the military for so long, to think about how things work or don't work and how these would apply. And some of the things that we've encountered, I think it certainly informed a lot of the questions that we had as we began doing the research and how we were going to explore this. And I think it also equipped us in understanding how, again, a group of people focused on very mission, purpose-focused group, right? The military. And people focused on being leaders. Leadership is important, right? It's a critical part of who we are in the military. So I think that gave us that context and a way to talk to audiences in other professions, in other industries, and other types of occupations out there. They're different. And I think that's one of the challenges, is finding the nuanced differences of what can I leverage in the culture of this occupation or profession that's different than maybe the military or maybe the legal profession, and use that to your advantage. Because again, I do think there are differences in the cultures within these different professions that allows you to leverage different things, and you should look for that.
I think two other things come to mind for me, Derek. I mean, number one of the inspirations for our first book, Athena Rising, was these women we worked with at the Naval Academy, these incredibly inspirational, incredibly talented, and tough young women who are preparing to go lead sailors and Marines in combat, right, when they graduate. I think, our sense was if more men around the country could engage with some of these women, I think we could solve for gender inequity much more quickly, because it would so shift their mindset on women and their capability. And I just think it would build a whole different framework for a lot of men who maybe are suffering from some real embedded gender bias they don't understand fully. The other thing about the military is, we have the luxury in the military of making this, as Dave said, a mission-driven organization. So when the four-star admiral, who's a CNO, says, make it so, we are going to incorporate women into this specialty, do it. Those are your marching orders, right? And everyone falls into line. This is about the mission, and we know we're going to be better and stronger if we get this right. So people fall into line. And I think that's a luxury a lot of organizations don't have, and there's something valuable about that.
Well, we talked a little bit about the unfamiliar territory this topic is, amongst others, to men. They're a minefield or full of trapdoors, vernacular that gets thrown around that you don't understand, even references to pioneers, female pioneers that are doing amazing things that men just don't naturally, they're not around it nearly as much. They're not part of these sacred circles where those conversations happen more naturally. Do you have any advice, just quick advice, for a guy out there who's like, all right, I really would like to lean in. I'm a little nervous, or I'm a lot nervous. Where do I start?
Yeah. There's so much here. Dave and I, in our first book, Athena Rising, described this as reluctant male syndrome, right? There's so many things that make us men uncomfortable with leaning into this idea or the topic of allyship. Really, frankly, just anxious about close relationships with women. Maybe it's mentoring, maybe it's friendship. Men are reluctant, and there are different ingredients. Maybe I don't want to step in it, get it wrong. Maybe I'm afraid of gossip or rumors if I start mentoring a junior woman. Maybe I've got implicit bias, so I see women as nice, but not really leaders. leadership material. Maybe I'm afraid of getting me too'd. I put that in quotations. A lot of false narratives around me too that have allowed men to sort of avoid women post me too, with a false narrative that women are dangerous. I will just tell you, as a clinical psychologist, and I spend a lot of time reminding men of this, there's only one cure for anxiety, and that includes anxiety about women. And it's called exposure therapy: more engagement, more interaction, more lunches, more coffee, more mentoring. Don't make that her problem. If you're feeling the anxiety, you need to address that yourself, because your organization is going to be held back if you don't lean in. Some other ingredients for overcoming this: get comfortable being uncomfortable, right? A lot of this is new to you. That's fine. You need to take the first step and start showing up at, maybe it's the women's ERG or other gender events. Start learning, start having more conversations with female colleagues. When you step in it, when you get it wrong, when you learn something, share that with other people, maybe other men. Say, I really got this wrong today in a meeting. I got feedback about it. I had no idea I was doing this. I'm sharing this with you in a spirit of humility. Maybe you can learn from my mistake. And I think I'm better for having learned that. So those are just a few ideas.
Love that. Well, I've asked you both a bunch of questions that you've been so thoughtful about answering. And the final part of our podcast is me flipping the script a little bit and throwing it to you guys to ask me a question, which I don't know what it is. And so I'll do my very best to try not to step in that trap door myself. So I'll let you have at it.
Okay. Well, Derek, it won't shock you. I got to follow up my last comment by just asking you, have you had one of those experiences that Dave and I have experienced almost every month in the last 12 years, where you kind of got something wrong, maybe in the space of relationships with women, to be an ally? Maybe in a meeting you did something or said something that didn't land well. Was there an example, something come to mind? And then how did you pivot from that? How did you learn from it? How did you recover? Because often these are sort of epiphany moments for men. So I just wonder, is there something for you?
Well, I'd be lying if I said it doesn't happen often enough to be dangerous. Like I can't give you a specific example right now. Maybe I don't want to on air, but it happens. And I think the important thing that you talked about was like being in a comfortable enough place where you could actually acknowledge it again.
Yeah.
Share it with somebody. Share it ideally directly with the person, in my opinion, who maybe did take something the wrong way or find what you said uncomfortable or whatever it might be. Like, I think the important thing is to not brush it under a rug, because then you can be better for it. I first started my journey on being part of women's organizations about 10 years ago, when I was asked to be the only man on the board of a women's organization called Watermark. And being the first man in the door was really exciting, really daunting. And I found myself in the first several board meetings not expressing my opinion on much and doing a whole lot of listening, which I don't think is a bad idea, by the way. But
Yeah.
my very first introduction to that organization was one of the board members coming up to me saying, "Derek, I did not vote for you to be on the board." And I thought to myself, well, this is a crazy introduction. How am I going to fix this? And my response to her was, well, it'll be up to me to make you change your mind. And so, I take that into consideration when I'm having these reflective conversations with people. It's up to me to make you change your mind about the things that I'm saying. It's up to me to make myself a better resource, a better mentor, a better advisor, and a better person in general. So that was very long-winded.
I love that example. Yep.
Well, and so a little commercial for the two of you. How do our listeners get a hold of you two for speaking engagements, for anything related to this topic, other than obviously going to your favorite bookstore and picking up a couple of books and a third on the way?
Yeah, you can. I think the easiest way is just to go to our website, and that's Workplace Allies. That's all one workplaceallies.com. And you can find out the latest on what we're up to and reach out and we can certainly talk about things if there's ways that you would like to collaborate with us.
Fantastic. Well, on behalf of everybody who's listening, I thank you for the great work that you're doing. You're two incredible men, leaders, fathers, and resources to our country, in addition to being great sociologists and psychologists. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it very much, and I hope you guys have a fantastic day.
Thanks, Derek.
Thanks, Derek.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the DeWinter Difference podcast. If you like this episode, head to dewintergroup.com/DeWinter-Difference to catch future episodes and share your thoughts, comments, or suggestions. And make sure to connect with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. This podcast is produced by the DeWinter Group, the leading recruiting firm in the Bay Area and beyond. We help top companies and people reach their fullest potential through world-class accounting, finance, and technology recruiting services.